we are at 8 a.m., at least in Pacific time. Both of the panelists here are in Europe, so I'm the only one in the US. Josh Wright was going to join us, but unfortunately something happened with a flight, and he is, I don't believe, on the ground right now and able to join us. But the good news is both of these gentlemen are very, very skilled and talented, and very happy to have them here as panelists. So quick introductions. My name is Steve Sims. I'm the Offensive Ops Curriculum Lead at the SANS Institute. I have been doing vulnerability research for the past, I would say 20 years, but that would age me too much. But somewhere around there is how long I've been doing that. It's just my main focus area and passion that I enjoy. I run a weekly stream on YouTube and other platforms called Off by One Security. If you want to check that out, we mostly talk about intermediate to advanced topics all around the spectrum, not just on exploit development, of course. And then we have Chris Dale. Chris is a certified instructor, and he co-founder of a company called River Security, doing consulting in Europe, I assume mostly, of course, but he will educate us further on that one. But a couple of notes about Chris. He came out to DEF CON last year to help train and work with a team from Singapore on some of the capture the flags going on in the villages there. And the reason I thought of Chris when we had that opportunity is because Chris joined me on a stream on API hacking where he was asked to randomly, he didn't even know it was going to happen, but pen test this kind of capture the flag environment that was built, and he just destroyed it. It was very impressive to watch just kind of how his mind went there and did amazing things. So I was like, okay, when that opportunity came up for Singapore, I was like, Chris is going to be the guy for that one. So super cool stuff. And Erik Van Buggenhout is co-founder of a company called Inviso out of Belgium. I've known Erik for a very long time. First teaching 560 with him back in Amsterdam, I remember it was over 10 years ago, so pretty interesting. And they do, of course, a lot of consulting work and have a managed SIM product, or managed SOC product, I should say, an offering, and also has been doing a lot of work around the continuous pen testing and purple teaming space. I've spoken with them a couple times at RSA conference last year and the year prior. But again, I think the most important piece is both of these individuals are very, very experienced in the area that we're going to be talking about today on this panel on continuous penetration testing. It's something that comes up quite a bit. Even when I do my streams weekly, people are constantly asking nowadays, what is AI's role and machine learning's role in continuous pen testing and purple teaming or red teaming? And, is it everything from, is it going to replace us, to how effective is it? Or are vendors pitching something that's just not effective and customers aren't really getting a value that they want to get from it? So I think it's a good topic to talk about, especially since it comes up so often. But I'll go ahead and get started asking a couple questions here. And both Chris and Erik, of course, if you want to give a little bit more background about yourself, feel free to do so, because no one else is able to do it justice like your own. But I guess the first question is, what is continuous penetration testing, and what does it mean to you, kind of from your perspective and experience? Chris, if you want to start.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Steve. A great introduction. Love the DEF CON. First time to DEF CON, it was amazing. I'm going back for sure. So continuous pen testing. Basically, to me, it means to have a threat actor focus on the security of your organization throughout the year instead of once a year. That's what it means to me. Instead of like thinking that, look, having a pen test done on some few web apps or whatever you decide to have the scope be for the pen test, instead of thinking like that's going to cover your back and defend you properly, you're instead going to hire a company to look at the state of security over time. Because as you know, as I know, as we all know, IT is a pretty fast moving target. It changes overnight, multiple times. New CVEs, new vulnerabilities, new supply chain vulnerabilities, new libraries, new updates, and it's got to be checked by somebody who has an offensive mindset.
If you want, I can add to that, Chris. Sorry, Steve. You can see we haven't rehearsed all live.
We did not rehearse. No, you don't need to rehearse. No, I was going to ask you the same question, but also I was going to say, just to add into the mix, I know you've done a lot of work looking at tools like Caldera and other implants and kind of automation around that. And I remember when those tools like first came out, they couldn't do very much. So have they expanded as well? Like, are they capable of mimicking a real attacker?
Is that to me or Chris?
That's for you, Erik.
Okay, great. So yeah, it's quite interesting. First of all, on the continuous part, I very much agree with what Chris was saying. It's all about how we have this Pareto principle, right? 80-20, which I always like to refer. We often think in, but we make a snapshot and okay, it's secure or it's not secure, but well, 2 hours later, you no longer know, right? What has changed? Things like attack paths matter, for example, and we see that it's actually a new not a buzzword, but you see this coming up more and more. What they call attack path management, which is then often influenced not just by vulnerabilities but by behavior, like a domain administrator authenticating to a workstation, that kind of stuff. So in order to keep up with that, you have to do stuff continuously because the thing it always changes. On the Caldera front, I think it's amazing product. I sometimes say I have a hate-love relationship with it. But honestly, it's more love because it's a look. It's an open source tool. It's freely available. Well, would be a bit rough to have a very to say, oh, it cannot do this and that. No, it's actually pretty great at what it does. Those things have evolved, and if you look at Caldera, it's including things like the Pathfinder, where it's trying to become a bit more autonomous in the way that it makes decisions. So you can start to see that evolve as well, and I'm pretty curious to see how it's going to go. But indeed, I think that the most fundamental aspect of continuous both penetration testing and, let's say, purple teaming, if you want, then it's about the fact that you do it continuously, so that you always have the latest and greatest data sets, so that you can compare where am I now and where are we going. I think this is key.
I think on that note, you bring up a good point, or you maybe think of a good point, which is continuous pen testing. Is it fully automated, or can you let it go and do its thing, or is it more of a hybrid where humans are involved constantly in the process? Like, how automated is it really?
I think there's a few. Yeah, go ahead. You have to say names, Steve, because otherwise.
You can take
Chris.
it, Eric, but I got strong emotions on automation.
Go
All
first,
right.
Chris.
So penetration testing for me will forever be a manual process supported by automation, supported by AI. We don't replace. The replacement is a huge problem, especially now when we're in the AI revolution, where people stop using their heads. They stop using intelligence. They stop thinking and replace it with AI. AI, mind you, which has been trained on human knowledge and is filled with flaws and makes mistakes all the time. Sure, it can get better, but automation will not replace a penetration test. And if you ask me, automated penetration testing solutions, they can be great. So I'm not shaming the industry. I'm not shaming the vendors. I'm just saying that it's kind of like a glorified vulnerability scanner, and we're moving in the right direction, but we're not going to replace human intelligence, if you ask me.
Eric?
Yeah, I think it's a fair point. It's really down to that. I said 80-20, but it might be 70-30. But it's a very similar dynamic. I think automation will be able to do a lot. It will never get us entirely there, and you see that. You see that actually in most of the products as well. If you even go beyond the whole pen testing that we're discussing now, look at Microsoft with their whole Copilots. The name says it themselves, Copilot for security. They're building tools to make humans more effective, and well, they have a huge marketing and product decision team which makes those decisions, and they very carefully thought of it, and they said we're gonna call it Copilot, and I think it makes sense. It basically enables humans to act faster and to make more impact. So indeed, what's going to be crucial though, and this is why I do, when I see this whole AI thing and the automation, the hype, I do look at it a lot, and I play around with it a lot, because I do think it's going to be fundamentally important as humans to be able to leverage those tools to their fullest extent, because that's how we make impact. But yes, yeah, just throwing a task at an agent or a combination of agents is typically not a smart move, and we can delve into that a bit later, maybe when we're looking at some demos and stuff as well. But yeah.
Can I add to that, Stephen and Eric? Can I share my screen just for a brief second?
Sure.
Sure.
So I like to go off piste and just go live demos, whatever, right? That's okay. I should be sharing right now my screen sharing methodology on pen testing.
Yep, looks good.
Right. Yep. So if you ask me, pen testing is about, so it's an expert competency field. It's a place where you're supposed to be an experienced IT security person to help uncover vulnerabilities, right? That's the process of pen testing, uncover vulnerabilities. And to uncover vulnerabilities, we're going to have to discover what kind of attack surface there is. Say, for example, we got a hardware pen test, right? The hardware pen test can have a lot of attack surface in terms of what kind of chips they're running, if near field communications are turned on, Bluetooth, is there a mobile application? All of a sudden you need to do a mobile app pen test maybe. Is there a web application associated with the hardware? Whatever. You need to discover. And yes, AI automation can help complement and support you, for example, to observe what kind of attacks might be possible or what kind of features you might discover on application. And then we move into fuzzing and all kinds of other parts of this methodology here, right? Until finally, you have tools to back you up. And the tools are meant to support you and guide you perhaps, but the tools will typically not find a novel type of new vulnerability type. Tools will not, ask yourselves, who came up with the first SQL injection cross-site scripting ever? Somebody had to come up with that, right? Somebody had to bring up that novel topic of, hey, this is something new, this is something cool, so that scanners can go look for it. Pen testing is much more than just checking tick boxes and checklists. It's actually about applying intelligence to discover vulnerabilities, even the unknown vulnerabilities that we have not yet to learn of.
Yeah, it's interesting when talking to a lot of the Fortune 50 companies that I'm lucky enough to speak to and their concerns, automation, not concerns necessarily, but just their interests for the upcoming years and AI, automation, and supply chain attacks is like constantly coming up with every single company we talk to, which this, of course, falls under the automation part. I guess, oh, and also you made me think of when you said finding vulnerabilities and such, Google Project Zero with their big sleep project around AI for vulnerability research found its first 0-day and weaponized it back in October. And that was a SQLite Stack Overflow vulnerability. It was pretty neat to kind of watch the advancement of that. So I guess, Chris, back to you again on this one. Are the tools that you've seen so far, are they typically commercial, or is there a lot of proprietary automation going on with pen testing?
That's a great question, Steve. For me to be the best version of the pen tester that I can be, I need to use, some commercial tooling, but I also need to leverage the open source community's tooling and so on. And all of my tooling, whether commercial or free open source or whatever I might have, I might even write myself a script to do something. This tooling needs to fit into my continuous cycle of discovering vulnerabilities as part of an attack surface. So there needs to be a combination. I cannot limit myself to this one tool and hope that some vendor will build in some check for me. No, I need to be able to script and develop and basically make sure that I, as a pen tester, have a way to discover whatever I might need to discover. And that's something that changes from day to day. Tomorrow there might be a proof of concept on GitHub, some new CVE discovery type of script. I need to take that, look through the code, is it safe, and then start to scan my attack surface to see if there's any vulnerabilities.
It's interesting you say that because I was just talking to Microsoft not too long ago, and a director there was saying they wish there were more projects, open source or commercial, that are built from the start in a foundation of being extensible and more community driven. I mean, I know a lot of people can fork things and all that, but just from the ground up, building something that, like you said, if there's something that's missed and you need to add it, that you could easily add it to one of those tools or projects.
Yeah, and there's a beautiful project everybody should know about out there from Project Discovery called the Nuclei.
Yep.
Yeah, sorry, non-English speaker here. But this is a fantastic tool which allows you to essentially configure up a YAML file, a configuration that will go out and based on the configuration, do some fuzzing, look for some discrepancies, or look for whatever signature that might indicate that a service is vulnerable to whatever you might be looking for. And that's it's a community-driven project, and the engine is fantastic. Project Discovery. I'll drop the link into the chat for everybody to take a look at that.
Yeah, please do. So Erik, to you on this one, I know you've done a lot of work around purple teaming. We've done presentations on it. You wrote courses on it, so you're very familiar with it. The question, I guess, is continuous penetration testing makes a lot of sense, but how does it work on the side of purple teaming, especially given the I shouldn't say complications, but in purple teaming, you have a feedback loop. Offense and defense are communicating constantly. So how does that all factor in?
Yeah, It's an interesting one. If I may, I'm going to circle back for a second on the tooling aspect because it also
Sure.
relates to this. And I just I noticed one question here that I saw flying by, which I thought, okay, that's something I can squeeze into my response as well. I think one of the questions is there a difference between BAS tooling and continuous pen testing? So typically what you would see is BAS breach attack simulation, mostly focused on specific TTP testing, like a Caldera, for example. And that's honestly, it's very simple. You tell it what to do. Through Chris's eyes, as a true pen tester, he would say, oh, but Caldera is nothing more than a C2 channel, because technically it's an agent who is executing commands. So you tell it to do something and you tell it to run TTPs, it will happily do them for you. Continuous pen testing is where you get into these environments where this is really mostly I must say with continuous pen testing is mostly commercial platforms that you typically see these days. And I haven't really seen big, large open source ones. But what they typically do, and that's a bit, I think, what Chris also said, and there's actually another question, which is, I've seen them do a lot of the methodology and attack paths. What I've seen them do, and I haven't, honestly, I've messed with them a few times. I haven't been too convinced just yet, because I think it depends on what you're looking for. Take, for example, the top 10 tricks that we use to get domain admin, right? You connect to a network and then you know the old school stuff, some relay attacks, stuff like that. So there's these top 10 tricks. Usually they can do those things because they know those top 10 tricks. So they are efficient, they are effective in what they do, but they of course have strong limitations because they've been configured to do X, Y, Z. So do they have value? Yes, but be very careful on what you expect of them, on how far they can go, because that's really the thing, I think. One interesting one I would also like to mention is that's quite specific to there's a firm called XM Cyber. You might be familiar with them, but their approach, and that's why I mentioned them, is quite interesting. They deploy agents all over the shop, so everything has an agent, which is already like, oh, how do you sell that to IT, right? But bear with me for a second. They do not execute a single TTP. They don't do anything. But because they have agents on every single system, they're continuously mapping out behavior, vulnerabilities, and they're continuously showing the attack paths. Like, this is possible, this could happen. And that's a very interesting, I thought that was a very interesting approach. So they're basically stepping away from doing the actual testing itself, but always showing this is the actual attack path because we have real-time data of the devices because we have an agent. And I just want to mention that because it really, it's a very different way of tackling the problem, and I thought that was quite interesting as well. Sorry, Steve, I went a bit berserk, but it popped in my head, and I thought it's worth sharing that approach, that idea. Yes, so on the purple teaming side, I think indeed that the feedback loop is an important one, because you can run purple teams all you want, but if no one is ever actually going to develop a detection rule or do something, well, then it's not real good use of your effort, right? So you need to figure out, who do we work with? Who's going to help us do stuff? Is the SOC on board? Will they actually do things when we run a number of different TTPs every week or every month? That's fine, and we then map out what detections do we have. Is someone going to pick that up? Is someone going to do something with that? Otherwise, it's a bit of a lost lost effort, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we do see some questions coming in. Some of them, like if I catch it at the right time where it's related to what we're talking about right at the moment, I will ask it then or interject. Otherwise, we might get to some of them at the end as well. But since we already covered the one on automated penetration testing, solutions being kind of, I think, Chris, you might have mentioned glorified vulnerability scanners. This individual is saying, I've seen them covered 80 to 90% of the typical methodology and create attack paths. Well, what's your thoughts there?
Absolutely love it. So these solutions are not worthless. 80, like Pareto's principles, again, Erik's shout out before, 20-80 principle, right? You spend 20% of your time configuring up some tooling and it finds 80%, 90% of the stuff out there. But and hopefully organizations are able to follow up on that 80% type of finding and actually fix and mitigate stuff. But where the gold lies is in that exotic remaining 20%. That's what requires human touch, the human pen testers type of input. So be my guest, please use automated penetration testing solutions, but don't let them replace the human. That's what I'm saying. They are tools, and tools needs to be operated by AI agents together with together with humans.
True enough. I
Correct.
I'll ask a question on behalf of managers and directors. How do you measure the ROI on continuous penetration testing?
So I can start there, perhaps, Eric. On top of my head, the return on investment on a continuous penetration test would be the mean time to remediate threats. There's been some hype about, it's not a meme, but it's more like a saying that you got like 24 hours to patch these days, actually less than 24 hours. If you have something exposed on the internet and you're not ready to take that system offline or to mitigate a current ongoing threat, you're too slow. And if the continuous pen testing service that you're using can help reduce the time it takes from fixing issues that needs to be mitigated ASAP versus all the other crap that you got. There's all kinds of security hygienic issues. There's all kinds of problems out there with misconfigurations and vulnerabilities left and right, but just some things needs to be mitigated right now. And if you can make that time lower to mitigate those issues, that would be a good ROI type of measurement, I think.
Eric, your thoughts?
I think when you look at it from a purple team angle, there are some things that you can track, right? Because managers, of course, like metrics, and they want to know that the effort that is spent, either human effort or commercial tools, licenses, whatever effort, is delivering something. What we often see is increased coverage, for example, by the SOC. You can add, careful of course with this, because I like to say that MITRE ATT&CK is not a bingo card. It's not a bingo game that you're playing. So you cannot catch them all. It doesn't work like that. But if you know your what is the threat actor that you should be concerned about? What's the threat actors which are relevant to you? What are the priority TTPs for you to care about? Then I think you want to know two things. The first one, do I have controls that will actually, well, am I vulnerable to what they're trying to do, right? Do I have a control? And if I'm vulnerable, so if I don't have a blocking control for this, can I detect it? And if you have this, if the stars align against you, it means one, the TTP is important because threat actors are using it against you. You don't have a defensive control, and you're not detecting it. That's an area of attention. So those are things which you can visualize and usually kind of explain to executives as well, so they figure out, okay, these are the gaps that we need to close. And then you can of course show progress. You can show, look, we are doing this continuous thing, but you can see we're actually making progress here. It's never going to be perfect, but we are evolving in the right direction. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I can
also
metrics.
add, if I can, Stephen, I can also add to the return on investment, like shadow IT is a huge part of security. Very often when I do incident response, which I do too much, unfortunately, very often the assets that are being broken into, that cause the root cause analysis proves that it was like not through the front door, it was through some path least traveled. And if your continuous pen testing measurements, like services, whatever measures you have for continuous pen testing, can help you do that recon as well, that discovery of assets, and make you have a full understanding of your own attack surface, then that will definitively increase the success of your security programs and should perhaps be then a part of your return on investment. I mean, it goes back to the age-old general from the old days, right? Sun Tzu. What did Sun Tzu say? He said that know yourself and know the enemy, and you don't have to fear the results of 100 battles. And I think pen testing needs to do reconnaissance and discovery to help understand what the attack surface is. And if we at the same time can understand the attackers, well, we got a winning formula.
Yeah, I like to say too, kind of from the return on investment side, there's a term, return on security investment. I'm sure you've heard of, which is the money that you invest in some type of a solution or process, whatever it is. If it's less than the loss that you could potentially incur if there were a breach, and you believe that this investment is going to be very effective, then obviously that's another good way to look at it. This question is kind of out of my own curiosity, but what kind of coverage do you get with these tools? Because you look at like internal and on-prem versus from the outside, kind of against your external pieces, and then you've got the cloud components and APIs and all that. Like, what and now chatbots, of course, some companies have exposed to the web. So what kind of coverage do you get from these tools?
So I can start with my experience, perhaps, and I'll give it to Erik. I'll be quick on this one here. So my experience is primarily from an external attack surface management point of view. So my last 5 years has been deep into hacking into companies and not necessarily from the inside. But I got friends and customers who've been purchasing attack surface management tools. I got one from Saudi Arabia, a rich company. They bought 3 different solutions, and every different solution had different results. So coverage wise, it's 2080. You don't get full coverage unless you actually deploy some intelligence to the problem. Using AI to generate new subdomains, candidates, discovering more attack surface within a web application by fuzzing and discovering virtual hosts, etc. I mean, these are fantastic techniques that a lot of the tooling just won't show you. They'll show you information from certificate transparency logs, from open sources like Shodan, Census, security trails, etc. But when you want to get max coverage and get that full built-out digital footprint, that's when pen testers come to the rescue, if you ask me.
Erik, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's on the coverage point. It's you'll never get to 100. That's for sure. Because you of course have the part that you don't know about, the shadow stuff and well, remember when we were back in the 90s, right? And you could, well, I have to be careful what I'm saying, because back in the 90s I wasn't really working just yet. But where you would get like an ASN and you'd be like, oh, nice, I know their IP range, now I can scan them. That was simple, right? It's like, oh, so many IP addresses, that's what they have. Now it's just all over the shop. There's resources everywhere. There's data everywhere, resources everywhere. So it has become a very big problem, honestly. And I think it's a very tricky one to solve. When you look at it from the everything, I'm always trying to think of a bit the purple part in this conversation, because I think it's nice, it's a good dynamic. For that, you're typically looking at detection coverage. Do we have the right TTPs? Do we see that? Obviously, what you don't want to start doing is, most of your detections are linked to identities, typically a key one where you want to know, okay, but what are breach credentials, users who are being fooled, of course, to authenticate or to do stuff. Endpoint visibility is super important. The external perimeter and firewalls, that's usually, when it comes to detection, that usually takes a bit more of a backseat these days, because look, honestly, everyone's hammering your perimeter 24/7. So if you're gonna get an alert for everyone for every time that happens, you're going to drown. But yes, I think the tricky part is indeed knowing everything that you have, everything that's out there. It's a continuous effort, exactly what we're saying here, because you have it today, tomorrow it's again outdated, so you cannot do it in one-offs.
I'd like to make a shout out to Purple Teaming as well, because we can actually collaborate quite well on bringing the coverage higher. For example, there's another project from Project Discovery called Cloud List, which, given credentials, will allow you to list out every, say, EC2 IP address, every S3 bucket from the inside. So you don't have to go discover these things yourselves from the outside. So I got my own tooling on this. So we got like a Lambda function that will just enumerate the entire cloud, all the tenants, using credentials, so that you can basically give the pen testers the answer, effectively skipping discovery or reconnaissance. And now we have an upper hand on the threat actors, because threat actors, hopefully, they can't do that kind of purple teaming, joining together forces.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, and I noticed like a lot of the implant tools that are commercial or open source, they seem to start from the assumed breach perspective, where you run it on an internal system and you see what it can do laterally and escalation and all that. So interesting stuff. I guess question to you, Chris. Recon is typically the first step in many penetration tests. How do you see continuous pen testing playing a role with reconnaissance?
So reconnaissance is absolutely vital. And in fact, I'll go as far as saying, what determines my success as a pen tester or as an APT, an advanced persistent threat, is how good I am at doing recon. It's not necessarily how good I am at doing exploitation. It's about how good I am in finding, that path least traveled. Those systems that says like copyright 2012, I start to drool, I go like, ooh, this one doesn't have a cascading style sheets. It looks messed up. It looks old, and old is juicy, If I find those older systems, those systems that you've forgotten about, those systems that are no longer within your governance risk compliance type of protection, that is going to increase my likelihood of success. And Recon allows us to do this. Recon allows you to continuously discover, hopefully continuously, to discover what there is to attack from one day to another. And I'll quote the Americans here, the NSA. We got Rob Joyce. He was a DEF CON as well. Rob Joyce, he has a beautiful presentation where he talks about the success of the NSA. The NSA is successful not because they got more 0 days than everybody else. You know, they probably do. But their level of advancement is not the reason why they're successful in breaking in, he says. It is their level of persistence. APT, advanced persistent threat. Guess what? The persistent word is the word that matters the most. And it comes down to reconnaissance, knowing when there's a missing, like an outdated vulnerability not getting patched. And the moment there's a proof of concept out there, be the first one to exploit it, and you're going to win. Same thing with credential leaks, breach data, etc. That's how you get in, by just playing the waiting game for something juicy to drop and be the first one to take advantage of it.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's funny. Since I've done vulnerability research for so long, a couple of times I found unsafe DLL loading vulnerabilities where a DLL, it doesn't exist on the file system. It's improperly being loaded due to bad arguments with load library and such like that. I didn't think those were worth anything, but I heard from I'll just say a particular intelligence group that they are worth something because of the persistence thing you're talking about, where it's not a quick game. It might be 6 months down the road, and for whatever reason, that DLL then gets loaded, and all of a sudden you get a reverse shell back to you.
Nice.
Cool. So Erik, question for you on this one. AI agents are heralded left and right as the next big thing in cybersecurity that will solve all of our problems, of course. How do you see that working with purple teaming?
Now here we go. So a few thoughts to this, and I'll there's a few. I have quite a few things to say now, so bear with me. Yes. So I actually you remember, Steve? We did our talk last year about this with the whole continuous the always on purple team automated CI/CD for detection engineering, and that actually started looking into how AI agents could play a role, AI and AI agents in purple teaming. And maybe I'll just share my screen here for a second to explain a bit what we did there. This is, I'll share the link. This is, by the way, a publicly available presentation. So RSA published it. You can see it. You can see myself and Steve having a lot of fun. But what's the idea behind it? It's basically the point is that you want to, what you cannot do is automate an entire pen test. So we're fully aligned with what Chris is saying here. I don't think that works. However, when it's about running a series of TTPs, that is something that you can absolutely do. TTPs being an atomic TTP, right? One specific technique. For example, can I dump Elsas? Very silly. That's one specific atomic TTP. Can you automate that? Hell yeah, it's not hard. It's very easy to do. You also don't need AI for that. Then you could leverage an automation framework to say, okay, look, we're going to emulate these. But if we emulate them, we're also going to interact with our detection capabilities, with our XDR SIEM, whatever you have. We're going to see, do we actually see a detection for that specific TTP on the system that I just tried it on? Because that's the advantage, right? When you're purple teaming, you actually know, you have the information. You know that you just tried that technique, so you can see, do I get a detection or not? So that's nice. That works quite well. We've automated quite a bit of that. But then the next step is, oh, we have a gap here. Shall we now try to develop a detection rule for this? Yes or no? Depends. Maybe sometimes you don't want to, because it's not smart to develop a detection rule for every atomic TTP. Some of them are just less interesting. But that's where we start looking into, can we actually use AI to generate or to come up with a detection rule? And it's relatively okay, actually. Can I show you a few of the numbers? Just a couple of results, because that could be interesting. Because we actually tried this. We tried running through that. And I was actually quite impressed by how it worked. So the architecture we set up is this thing here. We basically used we used XOR as an orchestration engine. Could be anything. Could be Tines. Could be your own scripts. Could be logic apps. Could be Azure functions. Could be something non-cloud. You choose. It's basically just an automation engine, which is coordinating the whole flow. It gets Caldera to run TTPs on a system with an agent. You then fetch all of the detections from Sentinel, and then you compare them and you try to figure out the detection rule. What we actually noticed was, if I go through this real quick, I'll actually go to to the results. So really, because we don't have that much time here now, but you can see that the results are quite impressive. When you run a specific command like who am I, that's the first one here on the table, you'll see that you ask it to create a KQL query. So you see the thing with the square in pink, that's us asking AI, hey, can you build the detection rule? And of course, what does it do? Oh yes, you can make one. If you look for 4688, that's a command. That's basically process creation on Windows. If it contains who am I, well, that's a very brittle rule. It's a bit silly, but it's an effective one, right? And then you can actually see that it's returning an error. And then we actually ask AI again, hey, there's actually a problem with what you just gave me. See, I'm getting an error. Can you fix it? And it's actually capable of fixing its own query. So that's pretty interesting. That being said, imagine you were to click play and go to sleep. You're going to wake up to a bit of a mess, I guess. But it goes to show the speed you can win. So I am very convinced of it's what they always say. It's not AI who's going to take your job. It's the people who are using AI very effectively and very capably. Those are the ones who are going to get your job, because they will produce 20 or 30 times the output you can produce. So I think that's it's a long answer to your question, but I fundamentally see a lot of value, but we will need those humans in the loop. Again, that's what it boils down to.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point. I love the fact, when you do panels online, you can share screens and do demos and stuff versus when you're in person. So take advantage. I guess on that topic, you made me think of something, and I think this is also something someone was alluding to in a question. How do you handle false positives or low confidence findings? Is that a problem with these tools?
Well, for the purple team part, not really, because you're just executing TTPs. But I'm guessing for Chris, if you want to jump on that, I guess, yeah.
So for me, false positives are a vital part of my continuous pen testing aspect. If I don't get false positives, it means that I'm not being broad enough in my reconnaissance. If I'm going to target a target company, I'm going to be targeting not their domain name. That's not going to be my seed, my starting of my engagements, of my reconnaissance processes, etc. Instead, it's going to be the brand name, the actual name of the company. And I'm going to be using that to look through certificate response logs. And I'm going to be using their logos to go through reverse image searching, for example. And I'm going to be naturally quite broad because I want to find that path least traveled, as I mentioned. And if I don't get false positives from my tooling, then my tooling is going to be too narrow. In other words, I'm not going to find that path least traveled. And that comes down to false positive management and how to use, for example, automation and AI to help you automatically score a false positive candidate. Is this domain a lookalike domain? Is it actually the customers? Based on all kinds of measurements, like they're using the same name servers, same logo, same privacy policy, they're pointing to the same infrastructure. There's all kinds of questions that can be answered that will help you quickly make a verdict. Is it actually a phishing website? Is it a customer, or is it false positive?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Yeah, I also hear a lot from those who do bug bounties. Like I've been hearing a lot from people who are trying to get into the field of like bug bounties and vulnerability research on web apps. And some of them are like, man, it's the same people are always getting all the bugs. How are they doing this? And I think there's a lot around the automation. And what they tell me oftentimes is that the people who like are doing well with them, they're scanning a list of like 100 websites that are like the ones that pay the most, the biggest, whatever, and they're watching for any kind of change. And as soon as there's a small change of any type, that's a new attack surface potentially that's now exposed.
100%. That's in my book. We call it the delta. That change in, for example, a screenshot changes drastically on a website. If the screenshot changes drastically, it means that there's a significant change on a website that requires testing. If there's a Swagger, if there's a new endpoint in an API, the Swagger definition, the JSON file, for example, Open API specification, there's a new endpoint. If you're the first one to find that endpoint, you're going to increase your likelihood to get that bug and that payout. Same thing applies to, say, status codes for web. It goes from a 401 not authorized to a 200 okay or a 500 internal server error. All of a sudden that happens, you got to trigger your pen testers or your bug bounty hunters to go in and research that change.
Yep. Makes perfect sense. I want to jump back to, I guess, talking about the scope again, because I think just thinking more about that when we've got stuff all over the world and different cloud providers and again, on-prem or whatever, how do pen testers, I guess, who are the ones running the continuous pen testing tools, how do they know what to test, Chris?
So it's a great question because it's extremely challenging to attribute ownership and whether or not you're allowed to start hacking on this stuff or not. And I've been in the case several times now where we by accident hacked somebody we shouldn't have hacked. And we're kind of lucky we're not getting in trouble because they appreciate the responsible disclosure. You know, one of the bigger one I've had is some dangling EC2 IP address. So imagine that you have an infrastructure as a service. We hacked the hell out of the service. And then one day the customer releases the IP address and it's given to somebody else a week later. Now that's a change in my operation, and that change triggers me to pen test again. However, now ownership has changed in AWS, and I found vulnerabilities that led us to a full AWS takeover, and it wasn't our customer's cloud. So how do we validate ownership? It comes down to a safe process for your pen testers to operate in, and it comes down to the level of intrusiveness that you can apply whether or not an asset has been confirmed in scope or not. For example, the scale I use goes from 1 to 10. 10, I can run vulnerability scanners and I can get reverse shells. I'm in, jackpot, baby. 5 is just normal usage or high throttled usage of the application, like enumerating folders and files, like forced browsing type of things. Anything above 5 would be considered to be an anomaly. You're now making waves. The SOC should really detect you, and you could maybe get in trouble. Anything lower than 5 is typically considered to be OSINT or just basically open source something, you're just getting information. If I cannot validate ownership or get my customer to confirm ownership, I should be careful in enabling processes of pen testing that involves higher than 5 in intrusiveness.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. I guess on that topic too, how do you ensure that, because obviously pen testers, we got rules of engagement and scoping and all that kind of stuff. How do you prevent business, disruption of production services? Because obviously a human knows that they might have crashed something or the other side, but from the continuous side on automation, how do you deal with disruption?
So should you want to take it, Erik, or should I?
I think there's two points to it. I think on the, and again with I think on the pen testing side, that's where there is a bit of that's where you need to tread carefully. Like what do you hit, what do you not hit? Understanding the business of the customer you're targeting, I think, is an important one. When you're doing like oh, that's a big mug, Chris. Sorry for the quick pause, but I was very impressed. Nice. On the when you're doing like a continuous testing of detections, the advantage that you sometimes have, and what I like to do is I just say, give me a sample of your systems, test systems, which are configured like production, but I'm not hacking them. I know that they generate the same kind of logs because they're configured in the same way as your production systems. I also know that you feed them into your detection tooling like you do with your production systems. So in that case, I'm pretty okay to go wild on testing detections. It doesn't work that way though when you're trying to hack into stuff, because then you can be a bit more like, oh, let's use a test system, but that's the problem. A test system is a test system. It's not production. So that is a very fine balance to find. When you're just testing detections, it's a bit easier to deal with that. But Chris, how do you typically deal with that when you're doing continuous pen testing?
Yeah. So it's a great question because it's a concern of so many. But also remember that my perspective is usually from the external side. If you put something on the internet, not only am I going to be hacking it, potentially causing it to crash, there's also going to be an army of all kinds of hackers and pen testers, scanners, universities, Shodan, and all kinds of people who are going to be hammering on your solutions. Except I'm doing it in a controlled manner, and I control my tooling, and I make sure that we're kind of like doing it in a controlled fashion. If I find your power plant on the internet, which we've found several times now, okay, I'm not going to be trying to hack it, okay? I'm just going to phone you up and ring you up and say, hey, your power plant, man, like it's here, your PLCs, it's online. You don't want me to hack it. I'll just ring you up and tell you to get the hell rid of it. So that's what you get from working with a continuous pen testing team, or should be getting from working with a CPT team. They should be advising you to do the right things, not necessarily hacking everything left and right, but making sure that you get that mean time to remediation as low as possible, and not just showing off your skills in breaking into a PLC, which is running a 10-year-old version.
Yeah. I think to that, Chris, if I can add, and it's a good point, I just thought of it, is the fact that you do it continuously also actually technically offers an opportunity for alerting. But just the fact that suddenly this PLC appears, that's a problem. So that's a reason to just go and even without looking at it, it's like, hey, this thing is now online. Are you aware of this? And that's what you don't get when you're doing the typical ad hoc stuff. So it's again about those deltas, continuous, being able to compare to previous states. I think that's where a lot of value is. Yes.
And then there's just it's a huge topic to talk about, honestly, if we want to go deep into how to preserve the availability of systems and so on to make sure we don't crash anything. It just depends on how deep we want to go here, Stephen. But there's lots of areas to touch upon.
Yeah. Could I can I still show something? Would that be all right with everyone?
Go for it.
I'm not gonna ask the entire audience. It's more than 200 people, so I'll just assume that you're okay with this. So one other thing I wanted to show, because it's always interesting to just indeed see stuff. One of the things that I've built, well, together with the team, it wasn't me on my own, and that I've, yeah, it's always nice to take credit. Look at all of the stuff I built. I'll say it very bluntly. I'm usually the guy with an idea, and then I need someone like, can we do this? And then in my head, it's like, it's quite simple, right? There's some APIs left and right. We call them or we throw something at it, and then I have the engineering teams come in and they're like, oh my god. But honestly, they then often think, yeah, it's actually pretty interesting. There's also cases where it turns out to be a very terrible idea, which is impossible, but that's also fine. I won't demo those, of course. But here's actually an idea of if you really want to see a very specific use of using an LLM agent in an operation, what we're doing here is we're actually, and I'm just going to play the video and pause a bit just to showcase a bit. So what this is doing, we're actually feeding it a TI report. So we're feeding it a threat intel report, which lists different techniques. You can see there from iced ID to Dragon Locker ransomware in 29 days. So it's an industry report which lists an adversary doing stuff and which is running different TTPs. Excellent use case for honestly for a very simple LLM. Just look at the PDF and extract TTPs from it. Again, they're not always great, but this is the kind of stuff that they're pretty good at. And so what happens is this is actually this is not just one agent, but it's a crew of agents that we built using Crew AI in this specific case, which is an open source framework that you can leverage. But you can see that there's a task coordinator agent here. You can see that at the top, which is saying to the Caldera agent, oh, look, we've got all of these TTPs, which were in the report, which we can now potentially emulate. Maybe important remark, coordination matters when you're dealing with AI agents, if you in any kind of setup and again, I'm not an AI expert. I've messed with it and I kind of like the results sometimes, but what I've noticed is make it very simple. If you want to introduce an AI agent anywhere in your flow, you have to be very specific. Don't tell it to check the external parameter of this company. It will go all over the shop. It has to be analyzed. For example, you would have an agent and you would tell it, analyze the SSL certificate or the TLS certificate, extract information. So it's like, okay, boom, done, boom, done. They just need to know very specifically, what do I need to do? Typically what you do is you add coordination agents, which keep an eye on everything. So you actually build kind of a hierarchy. So even AI agents have a boss, which is very interesting to see. But so you can see then TTPs from the report. Very quickly, what happens is, I thought it was very quickly, but my movie is a bit slow. Not to worry. It then goes into, okay, I'm going to use Caldera. Yeah, so the LLM agent do their thing. It's verbose output. So what it's basically doing, it's reading the Caldera API to also figure out how it needs to interact with Caldera. What we're basically allowing it to do is to actually create abilities in Caldera. So it knows, that's a TTP I want to run. It can then check Atomic Red Team, do I have a TTP to run? And then if it doesn't exist in Caldera, I'll add it as an ability into Caldera. Yeah, it's very verbose, the output, but So you can see there, it's actually been mapping. You can see here, perfect. It actually extracted the TTPs which were extracted were now mapped to Caldera abilities. So it says, look, these TTPs, you actually have Caldera abilities, which means you can very easily now emulate them. So that's pretty sweet. And then if you go through them, just let it, it continues processing, creating a profile. So it's getting everything up and running. Sorry for the Terminator memes. I thought that was funny for a presentation, but now they are hard coded in the movie. So now what you can do, and that's actually what I showed before. You can now start running TTPs once again through your XOR agent. Through XOR, you can basically specify we're going to run operation, so it automatically executes the different TTPs. And then you can, of course, get the detections. So all of that starts running again. So yeah, it's going pretty fast here now. But here, this is XOR. So we basically built an entire dashboard in XOR to be able to also talk to adapt the prompts as we see fit. But again, here you can see the focus. This is a front end for a user that we built. We basically built a front end for the user to see the results from the AI, let's call it that way, and to then interact with and say, okay, that's good, we can do something with that. No, that's not good. So you can see here we can adapt the prompt and so on. Again, bearing in mind that we don't have that much time left, I'll round it off here. But we have this entire demo, and the thing is available online. I'll share the link for the presentation. Do have a look at it. I find it very fascinating, and I think we're only at the start of this whole thing, but I'm very much, and that I also want to stress, because you might think, Erik, you seem to like AI more than Chris. I think we like it. We both like it, but we both realize that humans you cannot live without, because there's not gonna, this thing will go all over the shop if it's not properly configured and used.
I want to add to that, Erik, because it's pretty interesting to see the huge difference in testing from the inside versus from the outside. Because on the inside, right, we got our top 10 ways to get domain admin before launch. We got our go-to TTPs, but from the outside, there's just so much exotic stuff that is not like commercial off the shelf. There's just so much web apps that are handcrafted to serve some specific need of a company, and I cannot necessarily just enable some pre-configured TTP hunter to look for those things, because it's so much more proprietary, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's the advantage of running these little atomic TTPs. It's 80-20 or 60-40, however you want to spread it. It's very simplistic TTP execution, but the fact that you do it continuously, that I think is a big one. And what I sometimes like to say to customers is, when you get a red team in, because we do red teams as well quite often, and honestly, it's super valuable. But the whole point is you don't hire and I'll just say expensive red team, because it is expensive in just resources to do it. You don't hire them to then come and tell you, hey, did you know that I can run Mimikatz on your machines and I can dump your credentials? Hey, did you know that you don't have credential guard deployed? You should be able to test that individual TTP yourself, automatically, continuously. But what you hire the red team for is to have that beautiful look. We found the control, we pivoted, we then shifted to that, and that's where the value is. But there's so many, I think, sometimes think puppy mills red team pentests that you see, which doesn't really work.
Cool. Let me hit a couple questions from the audience here. How can organizations scale penetration testing to meet security needs while keeping pace with rapid development?
Oh yeah, so that comes down to how do you scope your and how do you operate your continuous pen testing team? Like, how do you focus your team into hunting where the hunt is needed? Like, you cannot pen test everything. We're not unlimited funded. We don't have unlimited people. So what do you test? When do you test it? How do you prioritize where your team focuses their efforts? And for us, what we do is we have a way of saying new delta, any addition to the attack surface, we're going to have to fully qualify and make sure that the addition is safe and there's no risk being introduced. And then when there is change, we're going to hunt on the change. And change comes from the IT assets themselves, or it comes from the cyber threat intelligence community. For example, a change might be new vulnerability. All right, new vulnerability in some kind of product, for example. Then we got to take all the olds, which we haven't really pen tested yet, and we're going to hunt on the old. But at the very least, make sure that you take account for the new and make sure you don't add more risk to your attack surface.
Yeah, good response. Here's another one. Are there any open source commercial tools, open source or commercial tools that leverage AI to enhance a pen test that you would recommend, like Burp Suite or something like that?
Oh, right. There are a few, and more are coming to the market all the time. There is a open source tool by Hadrian Security, which is very much AI-driven pen testing company and attack surface management company, called SubWiz. SubWiz will take in a list of domains or subdomains for a given apex domain, and it will try to, based on that list, generate, using a machine learning algorithm, generate new possible candidates to discover attack surface. So just one tool out of many, I guess. And I would also give a shout out, like if you're a bug bounty hunter, or if you're not fully set up with a proper attack surface management tooling today, which is fully AI driven, etc., check out Daniel Meisler's tool called Fabric. I might have butchered that last name. I do apologize to Daniel if so. But Fabric is a fantastic utility that lets you integrate prompts to AI into your command line. So I can, for example, right now, I can type curl sans.org, and I can basically grab the web contents from sans.org, and I can pipe it into a prompt that lets the LLM, the AI, give me an output of, say, what kind of technology sans.org is running based on their HTML file. And I get all kinds of prompts I can pipe into, enabling any tool that I have to basically become AI-fied, like, kind of like enabled AI.
Interesting. So let's ask this one here.
Maybe.
I guess Eric or either of you can answer this, of course. Yeah, can you, if you have a link to Fabric or whatever, those tools, can you put them in the chat? That'd be great. But the question is, I feel that a good pen test requires good preparation, defined scope, users, creds, APIs, etc. Is there a framework, process, or checklist that you recommend to take the best of these tests?
I think there's a few. There's if you're looking at frameworks, there's quite a few. We have, of course, everything that at times we use different frameworks that we use in our different courses. Some of the big ones are when you're looking at purple teaming, you've got the pentest execution framework. On pentesting itself, is the pentest standard, is that still being maintained, Chris? You might know better than me.
It's haven't been updated more than 10 years, but it's being quoted by major pentesting companies all around Europe and the US. OWASP is, of course, one framework that you can look at. They have the application security verification guidelines and web testing guidelines. They're pretty okay, but just word of warning, they're huge checklist-driven type of methodologies. So it's kind of like, oh, you got to test for this and this and this and this. Like it turns you into like a robot. I dropped the link to the methodology that I have developed. I'm very biased in this space. I dropped a link into the chat on a more timeless methodology.
Yeah, and that's the thing, Chris, and it's actually beautiful that you just said it. When it becomes a checklist and you're executing a checklist, guess what? You're next in line to lose your job to an AI, because
100%.
That's exactly what's gonna happen. So that is really a key thing there.
Oh, good. Let's just do one last one and then we'll wrap it up here. Let's see. Get back to my list. All right. I guess the last one we'll do is how much is the continuous penetration testing tactical versus procedural? Like, is it more about a process or is it more about a range of techniques can be applied? We'll close out with that one. Whichever one would like to take that on.
To me, you want to go, Eric?
No, I was just gonna say, well, I don't really get the tactical versus procedural. I didn't fully get the question, so that's what I was gonna say.
So
the question again.
I can
Go ahead,
start it
Chris.
off, and maybe on my answer, you'll get some ideas or insights from your end. But to me, it's much more procedural. It's much more about thinking and using your ingenuity as a human to figure out which strategies and tactics and operational attacks that might work. So if I weaponize my pen testers and my teams with a good procedure on how to go discover vulnerabilities, that procedure should lead into tactics that are applicable for showing the risk a company might endure on the internet.
Cool. All right, well, we'll wrap it up there. We are at 9 a.m., so 1 hour in. Hopefully everyone enjoyed the presentation. This will be available for rewatching later, of course, if you want to go back and review and grab those links if you missed them. But thank you so much, Chris and Erik, for helping me out here, and we will do this again in the future. If there's topics of interest that you'd love to see, feel free to hit us up. But we're all over social media on Twitter and such, Blue Sky, all the usual places. But thanks again, everyone, and we will see you next time.
Thank you. Bye bye.